This is the presidential report card for Herbert Hoover. We will be assessing him based on how well he fulfills the roles of the president. Herbert Hoover was born in 1874 in West Branch, Iowa. Raised as a Quaker, he was a professional mining engineer. He was known worldwide for humanitarian work in Belgium during World War I, and he was the head of the FDA. He served as the third U.S. Secretary of Commerce from 1921 to 1928. He won the Republican nomination effortlessly and was inaugurated as the 31st President of the United States March 4, 1929. President Hoover had a poor relationship with Congress because he felt as though the members were trying to sabotage his plan for their own personal gain. Despite this, he was successful in passing the Agricultural Marketing Act. He signed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, and he signed legislation designating the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. He also instituted a vigorous public works program to authorize $635 million for construction projects. Despite this, he did not utilize the chief legislator role properly and was incapable of solving the problems necessary to defeat the Great Depression. For this reason, we gave President Herbert Hoover a D- for his chief legislator role. Because of the state of the nation, Herbert Hoover had very little to do as commander-in-chief because there were very few military concerns that happened during his presidency. One notable thing that he did under the commander-in-chief role was ordering warships to Shanghai to defend U.S. citizens in China and Manchuria during attacks from Japan. During the Great Depression, when the Bonus Army was protesting in Washington, General MacArthur and Patton led the troops to clear out protesters of the Bonus Army. Hoover ordered the end of the attack on the protesters, but MacArthur and Patton ignored his orders. This was an example of Herbert Hoover being unsuccessful in his commander-in-chief role. For this reason, we gave him a D- in the commander-in-chief role. When Herbert Hoover was elected to the presidency, the government was functioning fine, but during his presidency, the stock market collapsed and the Great Depression began. Hoover was unable to use his chief executive powers to take control of the situation and work towards stopping the Great Depression. Hoover tried to do multiple things as chief executive to slow the Great Depression, which include having meetings with business leaders and government leaders, combining federal services, creating committees and organizations to help stop unemployment, and doing the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to make loans to struggling businesses. Hoover also appointed Charles Evans Hughes Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, but overall he was very poor as a chief executive. For this reason, we gave him a C- because there was more he could have done to prevent the Great Depression.
Before Herbert Hoover became president, he was actually very well liked. He was well known as the great humanitarian, and this is because of his success as a mining engineer. During his presidency, however, things began to take a change, and after the stock market crash, a lot of the American public took to a disliking for Herbert Hoover. One of the public images of Hoover was a very negative image, and a lot of American citizens would use insults as a way of mocking Herbert Hoover. One of the biggest insults was the term Hooverville, and this was a term for slums at the time, and many of these people living in these slums would call them Hoovervilles as a way of mocking President Hoover. Hoover was also very bad at communicating with the public. He was unable to use a radio as an effective way to communicate to the public, and because of this, this is one of the main reasons why he lost in the 1932 election, in addition to the public's negative view of him. Also, he rarely made public appearances, which also contributed to that. And because of Hoover's lack of public appearances, because of his poor communication with the public, and because of the poor public image that the American public held of him, we have decided to give him a grade of F for head of state. The Republican Party was actually huge at the beginning of Hoover's presidency. It had a House majority of 270 seats, which is the largest House majority in congressional history. So, at the time of the beginning of his presidency, the Republican Party was very popular and very big. And actually, Hoover was one of the most prominent of the Republicans at the beginning of his term, and a lot of the members of the Republican Party favored him. So, due to his decreasing public support because of the Depression and because of his incapability of handling the Depression, he began to lose a lot of support over this span of his presidency. So, because of this, the Republican Party lost a lot of seats in Congress. So, also, the Republican Party, even though it was losing support, it did favor Hoover. The Republican platform, a lot of it praised Hoover's programs, but unfortunately, due to his poorly portrayed image, the Republican Party lost a lot of support, and because of this, Hoover portrayed a really bad image of the party. And because of this, we have decided to give Hoover a grade of D for Chief of Party, because even though the Republican Party favored his programs and he at first represented his party well, he really caused his party to lose a lot of support due to his failure to contain the Depression during his presidency. We have decided to give Hoover a grade of C+ for guardian of the economy, and here are a few reasons why. Firstly, Hoover didn't cause the Depression. He is in no way responsible for it, but a lot of the public held him responsible for not doing enough during the Depression and for not being able to pull the country out of it. And even though Hoover did fail at this, he did try a lot to take action in reforming the economy of the United States. So each year, Hoover anonymously donated 25 grand of his salary toward victims of the Depression, and actually he's only one out of two presidents ever to have donated a good portion of his salary. The other president was JFK, but Hoover, in an effort to try to ease the Depression, did donate a good portion of his salary, and this is toward the victims of the Depression. And some of the programs he introduced later became major components to later relief efforts during the New Deal. He also tried to cut taxes, and he was a believer in the trickle-down economic structure. So, in a way, Hoover did slightly help the economy, but ultimately he didn't pull the United States out of the Depression. So because of this, because he was a small help, but even though he didn't fully bring the United States out of the Depression, we've decided to give Hoover a grade of a C+ for guardian of the economy. President Hoover actually took a huge role in diplomatic relations in the United States. Firstly, he tried to improve international trade in order to ease the worldwide depression, and he also took part in numerous other international affairs. One of them was an 18-month halt on German reparations. This was after World War I. Germany was still paying the war reparations as a result of it, and their economy was really poor, and in an effort to ease international trade, President Hoover decided to lay a halt on these reparations so that the German economy could recover and so that neighboring countries trading with Germany could also recover. He also went on a 10-week tour in Latin America where he gave speeches on his promise to decrease American political and military influence in Latin American affairs. Also, in 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, which is a province in China. Hoover signed the Hoover-Stimson Doctrine, in which he stated that the United States would not recognize Japan's gain in territory over Manchuria. So we decided to give Hoover a grade of a B for chief diplomat because he actually did a lot in terms of diplomatic relations. He played a huge role, and he did a lot to try to strengthen international affairs as well as in terms of the economy and in terms of political, military influence in certain areas.
Overall, President Hoover was a victim of circumstance due to the Great Depression. Because of his relationship with Congress and the public, he was unable to fulfill his role as president. For these reasons, we gave President Hoover the grade of a D.